Well, thank you very much, Refilwe. Indeed, and we are doing what perhaps should be called the post-mortem after that rousing speech by the DA leader, Mmusi Maimane. But let me perhaps start with my colleague, eNCA reporter, political reporter, Samkele Maseko. Samkele, you went around basically gauging the sentiment, in particular from within the DA leadership about that speech. What did the leaders tell you? Because it would appear that we've been very emotional here after that speech. What exactly is the feeling inside the DA after that speech by Mmusi Maimane?
Well, some leaders of the DA, Xoli, whom I spoke to, they were totally dismayed and flabbergasted by the speech that their leader, Mmusi Maimane, gave, basically saying this wasn't an elections manifesto speech. It was a political speech where he largely focused on the politics of the day, rather than speaking to what the DA is proposing to South Africans. They were flabbergasted, they were very angry and dismayed at what their leader, Mmusi Maimane, presented here today to South Africans when he largely spoke about the politics of the day and rather shied away from speaking about the bread and butter issues that are affecting South Africans out there, particularly the downtrodden and the poor. We're hoping probably to hear what the Democratic Alliance and the so-called middle class and the upper LSM within society, hoping to hear what are the DA's plans to revive the South African economy, to revive ailing state-owned enterprises such as Eskom, Denel, the SABC, and the sad state of affairs that our economy finds itself in with a slow marginal economic growth.
All right, perhaps this is the point, therefore, where we bring the Western Cape leader of the Democratic Alliance, and that's Ms. Bonginkosi Madikizela. Mr. Madikizela, what happened there?
I think Sam is using very strong words. Well, I don't think we should totally dismiss the feelings of some people. I think one of the things that we need to learn as political leaders and politicians is to listen to what people are saying and have an opportunity, to correct, some of the things that they believe, should have done better. But I don't believe that. I think Sam is exaggerating, to be quite honest. Yes.
But is there such a feeling among the DA leadership that indeed there was a missed opportunity there by the leader of the DA, focusing rather on the politics of the day as opposed to looking and digging deeper into what the Democratic Alliance is offering as an alternative?
Well, I think the speech was in twofold, Xoli. Obviously, the first part was about really reminding people about the state of our country. The second part was about a compelling offer that the DA is putting on the table. I take the point, from some of the people who are saying maybe we spend little time talking about the offer, which is an alternative to the current government in order for us to deal with the current challenge. I take that point. And I think perhaps my advantage is that I was part of the manifesto, compiling of the manifesto, and I know what is in that manifesto. But as I said, I hear what Sam is saying, which I think is exaggerating. But I think as politicians we must learn, from the views of the people. And the question is, do we have an opportunity to correct that? I think yes, we do. Because this
also, there was a mistake committed. Is that what you have?
No, I'm saying I'm not dismissing the views of people who believe that the leader perhaps didn't spend a lot of time, talking about the intervention or the offer that we're bringing on the table as a DA. So I'm not dismissing that view, but I'm saying if there isn't that view from certain people, then we have an opportunity to correct that because we still have provincial manifesto launches. And I think taking that view from the people, it means that we must focus more on our offer, in the upcoming provincial manifesto launches.
Let's take this opportunity, therefore, to speak about the Western Cape. You are the leader of the party there. You've been in charge of that province now for the past 10 years. Give us your numbers in terms of job creation. Of course, jobs is the order of the day as we lead up to the 8th of May. Talk to us about how many jobs the Democratic Alliance there has helped create. Of course, the environment being conducive for business to thrive, of course.
Look, I think part of our manifesto launch today was not just about an election promise. the manifesto launch today was about emphasizing the difference between our government and the ANC government, to really compare notes, apples with apples, in terms of our successes where we are in government. I mean, if you look at the jobs, which is a very good question, is that over the last 10 years since we took over the government of the Western Cape, we created about 508,000 jobs.
Over the last 10 years?
Over the last 10 years. Now compare that, Xoli, with the last 10 years of the ANC. I mean, if you look at the Stats SA report that has just been released, it's saying that between the third quarter of 2008 and the third quarter of 2018, 1.7 million people joined the queue of unemployed people in South Africa nationally. Now, I think that is quite telling. I mean, so it's an illustration of a successful government versus a failing government. Now, we achieved all that despite the challenges that we are facing in the Western Cape, challenges of drought, particularly in the agricultural sector, where our province was hardest hit. This is a clear indication that when you govern well, you can attract investment, because the large part of that employment is coming from the fact that we were able, through our agencies like Westgrow, to attract over 100 billion rands of investment so that people, can be employed.
Let me ask you this question quickly. It's definitely related to jobs, or it links directly to the issue of jobs. The national minimum wage, where does the party stand in as far as that's concerned?
Look, we are very clear as the party here, is that we seem to be focusing, particularly if you look at the debate on the minimum wage, the unions, some of the government officials, we are really focusing on protecting those people who have jobs already. And we must be careful of really focusing on protecting people who have jobs and really leave out people who do not have jobs. There's a minimum wage and there's a living wage. And I think we are saying it's very, very important for us as South Africans to understand that we are not saying the minimum wage is a living wage. But what we need to do is to make sure that people are able to get the foot in the door and be employed. Because you can't...
Simple question, Mr. Madikizela. Does the Democratic Alliance support or reject the national minimum wage, which is set at 20 rands per hour?
No, we are saying, as a Democratic Alliance, we need to make sure that we create an environment where people are able to work. Because this issue of minimum wage, which is now has divided, many people, we are saying, yes, we support the minimum wage, but we also saying that it must be determined by different sectors. To have a blanket minimum wage, you are actually running a risk of really discouraging investment in some of the sectors.
Let me bring in my colleague once again, Samkele Maseko. Samkele, the Western Cape is going to be quite interesting in this upcoming election. You have Patricia de Lille, who was the city mayor of Cape Town, and she's since left the Democratic Alliance, and I think the history is there for all who may not know what happened to her. She left the Democratic Alliance and formed the Good Party. What's the sentiment in as far as the performance of the DA vis-a-vis what her party's prospects are going to be?
Well, that would arguably depend on how citizens within the Western Cape perceive the former executive mayor of the city of Cape Town. That would be Patricia de Lille. I saw her manifesto launch, where she also televised it on Facebook and other platforms and on Twitter, where she was basically speaking to her constituency. It was rather interesting that she opted not to have a stadia set up such as this one. Many optics would say, particularly coming from the Democratic Alliance, she simply doesn't have the numbers to fill any stadium in the Western Cape. She was trying to save herself from any embarrassment. But in her argument, she's saying that those resources, those financial resources that she may have used to book a stadium, to organize an event of that magnitude, will be used in the campaign. It's rather interesting that she has opted to be the premier candidate of the Good Party in the Western Cape, basically saying, I'll be first regionally based, regionally focused, to try and arm wrestle the Democratic Alliance from power there. Bonginkosi Madikizela here would know, because Patricia de Lille became her political foe, particularly at the time where he was perceived to be gunning for that mayorship in the city of Cape Town. I don't know whether he was available or not. He knows the answer to that, but it would speak to how she is received by the residents of Cape voted on by the citizens of the Western Cape, and if she actually has that support on the ground and she is followed as a brand rather than people following the Democratic Alliance brand. So that's where you need to distinguish between a personal identity and a political party identity.
Mr. Madikizela, your electoral prospects in the Western Cape. You have an ANC that some are saying is revitalized under the leadership of Cyril Ramaphosa. You also have the Good Party. How the leader of that party left the Democratic Alliance upset many people, in particular, if we must go into the issue of identities. It upsets the coloured constituency, and that constituency is what you've heavily relied upon to retain that province.
It's a very wrong assumption to make. You know, if you look at the history of the Western Cape, the majority of coloured voters in the Western Cape have never been loyal to a coloured leader. They've been loyal to a brand of the party that they believe in. So, you know, when analysts make this mistake of really linking coloured voters to a coloured leader, they must actually look at the history. The ANC, if you look at the ANC history in the Western Cape, with very strong leaders, like your Alan Bosak, like your Chris Nissen, since 1994, they've never won the Western Cape. So it's a very wrong assumption. But here's what I can tell you. Is that yes, we had some challenges in the Western Cape, but the voters of the Western Cape, black, white, coloured, Indian, they believe in this brand called the DA. They are angry, they were angry with us, but we are engaging them now. We are on the ground, focusing on two very important things, really. The issue of unity and the issue of service delivery. And I think
the issue of service delivery in as far as the housing or spatial planning, which has, I think many have said, gentrification, what the Democratic Alliance seems to be bringing inside that particular province. How are you doing in terms of...
Again, that's not true.
Okay.
You see, some leaders, you know, when leaders leave the Democratic Alliance, they have this tendency, you know, of coming up with all sorts of propagandas to try and discredit the DA. If you look at the housing delivery in the Western Cape, for example, it is true, but it's a South African phenomenon, Xoli, that the inner city development is still a challenge, and it's the legacy that we need to deal with. But if you look at the number of interventions that we are making in terms of inner city development, and unfortunately some of the people who are now, you know, blaming the DA are the people who were entrusted with that responsibility and they failed dismally. But that's a debate for another day. But the challenge really of, you know, spatial development and integration of communities is something that we need to deal with as South Africans, because it's the legacy that we'll continue to grapple with for some time.
Final question to you, sir, before we wrap up this conversation. You are the leader of the DA in the Western Cape, yet you are not the premier candidate. How is that interpreted? What is happening there? How should South Africans interpret that? Because I'll give you what the one sentiment was on Twitter, for example, that you see the reason that Madikizela is not the premier candidate talks to the very thing that we always complain about, that you see DA members who are black out in the streets campaigning whilst the white section of the DA is sitting in air-conditioned offices. Is that essentially what is going on here?
You know, the interesting thing is that in the history of the DA in the Western Cape, the leader of the DA has never been a premier candidate. You know, and people really must look at the history of the DA and understand that we are not operating like other parties. Thean Sporter was the leader of the DA, but Helen was the premier candidate who ended up being the premier. You know, at one stage, Ivan Meyer was the leader and Helen was the premier candidate. It's the same situation in Gauteng as well. John Moody is the leader of the DA, but he's not the premier candidate. So people must not come up with these, you know, with this propaganda when they try to tarnish the image of the DA. So it's not an anomaly, you know, for the leader not to be the premier candidate.
But with due respect, Mr. Madikizela, you omit one truth to that. Xoli Mngambi is the provincial leader in KZN, and he's the premier candidate. So let's not say that it's not an anomaly, because in certain instances it does happen.
But in the Western Cape?
And on a critical question here, when it comes to the politics of the DA in the Western Cape, it would be interesting to find where your name is on the province to province list, whether it's high up or lower down. You know the truth where your name is, and certain phone calls that were made to certain leaders to ask, how did this happen?
No, I'm not going to... Remember, we have a process in the DA. We are finalizing our list process, you know, at our federal executive meeting next weekend. That question will be answered then. I'm not going to answer that question. But I was specifically responding on the Western Cape. No provincial leader of the Western Cape has ever been a premier candidate. That's the point I was making.
Mr. Madikizela, we're completely wrapping it now. Where's Helen Zille? Where was she here today?
Well, she was not here.
Why?
Well, maybe it's a question that she would be able to answer, but my understanding is that she had other pressing matters to deal with.
What are those pressing matters?
I don't know. It's a question that you can put to her.
Where was Gwenya?
I don't know.
That's Bonginkosi Madikizela. He is the leader of the Democratic Alliance in the Western Cape. And that's how we wrap things up here at the Rand Stadium. This was the venue of the launch of the Democratic Alliance's manifesto launch.